Support comes from BECU, a member-owned credit union putting people over profit, offering financial services and support to the community with access to local financial centers, over 30,000 ATMs, and online resources at becu.org. Federally insured by NCUA.
Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. A year ago this week, a Minneapolis police officer was caught on video killing George Floyd by kneeling on his neck for almost 9 minutes. A year before that, an Auburn man was killed when a disorderly conduct call escalated into a fatal police shooting. This fall, the officer who fired the shots will go on trial for murder. Seattle Times reporter Sara Jean Green will tell us about it in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. State Attorney General Bob Ferguson's office says they'll have an announcement today about whether any officers will be charged in the death of Manny Ellis. Tacoma police officers killed Ellis while he was in their custody in March last year. The Pierce County medical examiner ruled Ellis's death a homicide. The investigation conducted by the Pierce County Sheriff's Department was so problematic that Governor Inslee reassigned it to the State Patrol. Seattle is shutting down all but one of its mass vaccination sites next month, but will still offer mobile vaccinations. It makes sense. More than 3/4 of eligible Seattle residents have received at least one shot. 60% are fully vaccinated. The city-run sites at Lumen Field, Rainier Beach, West Seattle, and North Seattle College will close in June. The Seattle Fire Department will continue to run its testing and vaccination site in the Soto neighborhood south of downtown through the summer. And Jeff Bezos has officially given his notice. Bezos announced yesterday he'll step down as Amazon CEO July 5th. Andy Jassy, who currently helms Amazon Web Services, will take his place. Bezos will continue to serve as chair of Amazon's board of directors, where he's expected to continue to wield influence over the company. Speaking of Amazon, the company announced Wednesday it's inked a deal to purchase the Hollywood studio MGM for $8.4 billion, its second largest acquisition to date. Hey, there are some hard details in today's show. If you're not in the mood for that right now, maybe listen later today.
I was driving when I heard the news, and I had to pull over because I was afraid of my yelling and screaming might get me pulled over. And I told somebody when they saw me, they're like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Just keep going," And it was really to see justice prevail, to see that this is setting precedent, as a lot of the impacted families have said tonight, for the hundreds of families that are waiting for a semblance of justice. This is hopefully not going to end here.
That's Elaine Simons speaking on the night of April 20th after the news broke that former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was found guilty for the murder of George Floyd. It was intensely personal news for Elaine. 2 years ago, her foster son, Jesse Sarey, was shot and killed by an Auburn police officer. This fall, that officer, Jeffrey Nelson, will go on trial for his death. Seattle Times crime and courts reporter Sara Jean Green has been following this story and is here to talk with me about the case. Sara Jean, thank you for being here.
Absolutely, Patricia.
So Officer Nelson will be the first law enforcement officer in Washington to go on trial for killing someone in 40 years. Why is that? Give me some perspective.
So prior to the passage of Initiative 940, which then became the Law Enforcement Training and Community Safety Act, it was very difficult to bring criminal charges against police officers who injured or killed somebody in the line of duty because the prosecution had to prove malice, that basically an officer had acted with evil intent. The new law removed the malice standard. So prior to passage of this law, it was very difficult because proving malice was a very high bar. And so it resulted in, very few prosecutions of police officers.
And you mentioned I-940, and that was the voter initiative that passed back in 2018 with something like 60% of the vote. This was fairly popular for an initiative.
Yes, it was. And, pretty widely supported, I think.
And let's talk about the changing of the malice standard a bit more, because it really is the key change here. Explain a little bit about why that bar was so high.
Well, think about it. Evil intent. Our law enforcement officers, they're sworn to uphold the law. And so trying to prove that an officer, despite all his or her training, despite their community caretaking role, despite that oath to protect and serve, now you've got to prove that somebody maliciously acted with evil intent. Prosecutors across the state, they are ethically obligated not to file criminal charges unless they believe they have evidence to prove the charge beyond a reasonable doubt. So you can't charge something that you can't prove. And we're not saying that every officer involved shooting is a bad shooting. These are very individual cases, and, they have to be investigated thoroughly. And now there's a requirement that, there's independent investigations. And whether or not, a reasonable officer in those same circumstances would have felt that deadly force was necessary. That's kind of the new standard. What would a reasonable officer in that situation do, and would that officer consider deadly force necessary?
Okay, so we have a test case when this goes to court. Let's talk about Jesse Sarey and Officer Nelson and what happened in Auburn on May 31st in 2019.
So people had called into 911 to report, that this man was throwing trash at cars and banging on windows. So a public disturbance call. And so Jeffrey Nelson was one of the responding officers. He got there first. Jesse crossed the street and was outside this little grocery store, so Nelson drove around to the grocery store and had an interaction with Jesse Sarey and announced that he was placing Suray under arrest for disorderly conduct. And once he said that, Jesse struggled and there was a fight between him and the officer. A folding knife, it was, folded closed, skittered away from Jesse. And I don't know if it was in his hand, in his pocket, but it was picked up by a witness and put on the car. And, this kind of scuffle between the two of them continued and resulted in the officer firing twice. The first bullet hitting Jesse in the abdomen, which the medical examiner determined was the mortal wound. And then a couple of seconds later, he shot a second time, hitting Jesse in the head.
And Sarah, this all happened pretty quickly, right? As we have seen in other encounters with police.
Certainly, it was seconds. And then after the second gunshot was fired, very soon after that, the other two Auburn police officers arrived at the scene. And so that was one of the things that, the state found, was that Nelson didn't wait for backup before he initiated this encounter. And experts retained by the state in reviewing the video and reviewing the, investigative file, all of that, determined that Nelson, that this was a police-created emergency, that Nelson used deadly force because he was the one who escalated as opposed to de-escalating the situation. He escalated things and used deadly force to end what the experts termed a police-created emergency.
This starts out, Sarah, as a simple disturbance call and ends up in the death of Jesse Sarey, a man of color. We should note that Officer Nelson is a white man. Where will prosecutors be focusing their attention during this trial?
I think the video, as it was in Derek Chauvin's murder trial, those poor jurors had to watch that video over and over again. And I'm certain that the video evidence in this case is going to play a significant role, step by step, walking jurors through it. And I think that we can expect police experts on behalf of both the state and the defense to testify in this trial. And there will be competing theories as to how these events unfolded and whether or not Jeffrey Nelson acted within his training and the Auburn Police Department's policies. And his statements, the statements that he made about this shooting. One of the things, it mentions in the charging documents is the inconsistencies between what he said happened and what the video shows. I think that's going to all be part of what is put before this panel of jurors.
Okay, so there's a lot of pretrial stuff happening right now. Nelson won't be on trial for a little bit, it's likely there's going to be intense interest in this. And we just did have an entire country on edge watching the Chauvin trial on television. Are you getting any clues from the judge or anyone in the legal field about how this case is going to be handled?
I think it's still a little bit too early to know that. And, it's not uncommon for, especially murder trials, for trial dates to be continued as issues come up.
Yeah.
And they're still in the discovery process, and that takes time. And it is a complicated case. Both the state and the defense have hired or will be hiring their own experts. As we saw in the Chauvin trial, there will be, competing theories as to what happened. Early on in our reporting, after he was charged, one of the attorneys had mentioned the intention to pursue a self-defense claim, which I believe is what happened in Chauvin as well. But it's a little too early, to really get a sense of the strategies that, the state and the defense will be going into this trial with. And, a lot will determine, too, where we are in the pandemic in terms of how many people can be in a courtroom. I was in court just last week, and, most of the observers dialed in via Zoom. So again, with Nelson, I think it'll just really depend on when they're ready to go to trial and where we stand pandemic-wise.
Yeah. A big test for police accountability here in Washington State. We will be following it. Sara Jean Green covers courts and crime for the Seattle Times. Thank you. Great to talk with you, Sara.
Great talking to you, too.
Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Diana Opong helped produce this episode. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.